Hello and welcome to another episode of BioTalk. Once again, I'm Chelsea Zimmerman, and with me today is Dr. David Prentice. Welcome. Thanks for joining me again.
Good to be with you.
Now, Dr. Prentice, you have a new job since the last time we spoke, which has been a couple of years. Well, not the last time we spoke was just a few months ago, but the last time we spoke on this show was a couple of years ago. So you've gotten a new position and a new job. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where you're at now and what kind of work you're doing up there?
Glad to do it. I'm the Vice President and Research Director for the Charlotte Lozier Institute. We're the education and research arm of the Susan B. Anthony list, and some of your listeners might be aware of them at least. Political action group dedicated to promoting pro-life candidates, especially pro-life women candidates. Very involved in the political aspect, but we're providing a lot of backup in terms of the science, in terms of medicine, abortion statistics, and so on. It's really kind of what we are, is trying to be, in a sense, a pro-life counterweight to the Guttmacher Institute.
Right.
Haven't really had anything like that for the pro-life community. We've relied on the abortionist statistics, which is a little strange perhaps. But so what we're doing, we have very few full-time people, but then we also have a number of associate scholars. These are elite experts scattered across the country in medicine, in various areas of science, social science, bioethicists. We deal with pretty much every aspect of the life issue. So we've got folks talking about embryos, talking about the developing babies in the womb and abortion and all the horrors of that, science of fetal pain, viability, trying to get somebody to birth, but we also have people dealing with talking about Down syndrome and other types of other health challenges that people might come across. End-of-life issues, especially the physician-assisted suicide. There's such a big push on that right now. Whole host of issues. And what these people do is it gives us a way to tap a great deal of expertise in all of these areas. We ask them to write papers for us, academic papers, public consumption papers, blog posts and op-eds, and even to do legislative testimony. Even had a couple of associate scholars help write briefs, amicus briefs for the Supreme Court. So the Little Sisters case that's coming up, the Supreme Court, and the HB2 case from Texas and their law. So we try and cover a lot of areas. Sometimes we spread a little bit thin, but we are trying to give the pro-life aspect of all of these statistics. Our phrase is science and statistics for life.
Yeah, good. And so you guys are... Is there anything in particular you're working on right now that's kind of at the forefront of what you're doing, or is it just you just got all these things on the table right now? You're kind of...
Well, yeah, we're juggling a lot of balls in the air. It feels like there are a lot of things going on.
Right.
Back up, this past year, the fetal pain legislation, both here in Congress, federally, but also in a lot of states, was big. And so we had myself as well as several associate scholars out testifying on that, providing congressional briefings. That's still going to be part of our emphasis for the coming year as we look at legislation, born alive, infant protection laws, and so on. But also, we're still trying to promote ethical and successful adult stem cells. So we've even got a website that we manage called stemcellresearchfacts.org.
You just came out with a new video recently, I think.
That's right. A young man who's now about 10, diagnosed with leukemia. He had health problems pretty much since birth. They couldn't figure out what was wrong, and finally they diagnosed him with a certain type of juvenile leukemia, but it is a fatal leukemia, a very, very slim chance of survival. He got an adult stem cell transplant. He doesn't have leukemia anymore. Wow. Just a great joy in him. What a great young man. We tell patient stories and educate people about the success of adult stem cells along the way for that. Talk about the science a little bit as well. Other things coming up this year, and one that's in the news right now, is the whole idea of gene editing and parent embryos and all that, and we can discuss that a little bit more.
Well, that was the main thing I was actually interested in talking to you about, because Rebecca and I started BioTalk, and we talk to each other fairly regularly about these issues and keep wondering what can be done. Is there anything being done about what's going on? And one of the things you kind of alerted me to, that this was last year, and it was part of a budget bill. So this was something that kind of slipped under the radar purposefully. I think you mentioned you were purposely kind of keeping it quiet. But it was you called it at least the headline here was a modest but meaningful protection from human embryo genetic manipulation. So what did Congress do? I mean, what happened last year with this bill?
Let's set the stage a little bit, and I know you and Rebecca have probably talked about this enough with your listeners that they understand, but where we're talking about the 3-parent embryos, the gene editing, where they are either altering the genetic material by adding mitochondria, the little energy factories from a second woman, so you have 2 different women and 1 man to make an embryo, or going in and actually cutting and splicing pieces of DNA in the nuclear DNA. And we'd heard about this coming for a while. In fact, almost 2 years ago right now, our own FDA had a hearing where they were discussing the potential of moving ahead with creating these 3-parent embryos. And I went and testified. It was interesting. Chelsea, it was a 2-day hearing, but we kept hearing right from the beginning and several times during both days, we're just here to discuss the science. We don't want to talk about ethics. I mean, it was funny, but also chilling.
It really was. Of course, we've heard that before with the whole cloning and embryonic stem cell. We just want to hear about the science and not about the ethics or anything like that, which they have to go together.
They have to go hand in hand. And, and the other thing, of course, we've heard before and we hear again with these new technologies is we're going to cure all these diseases or even prevent disease. Well, what they're really talking about doing is not treating anyone who has any of these genetic diseases. They're talking about creating new individuals, specifically genetically manipulated so that they hope that they won't have the disease. So when it came time for myself and others to testify, why we talked about the ethics, even though we were told not to. And it was interesting because some of the reactions, even from the FDA committee, were, oh, yeah, we probably should be thinking about that. And, in fact, the patient advocate who was on there, a lady who had a mild form of one of these genetic mitochondrial diseases, her reaction was, we should be talking about something that might treat me and not just making babies that are genetically manipulated. Nonetheless, the FDA committee went ahead. They were looking at approving this. This was, again, 2 years ago. We talked to some members of Congress who insisted that the FDA actually look at the ethics. Well, the FDA commissioner at that point said, "Well, we don't really deal with that, and we're not equipped to deal with that." Big surprise, of course.
Right.
And so they were going to the subcontract, you might say, their ethical review. Who did they get to do that? The Institute on Medicine. Not exactly known for great ethical
It's not much better. No.
Now, I mean, a lot of science and medicine there, but they don't deal with ethics. In fact, these are the same people who think that human cloning is ethical, human embryonic stem cell research to actually destroy young human embryos is ethical. So you can pretty much expect the answer you're going to get back. But at least there was a little pause, this headlong rush. I might mention at that FDA hearing again 2 years ago, there were 2 scientists who want to do this embryo creation manipulation.
Right.
The technique they use is basically a cloning technology where they're transferring nuclei back and forth. They're not replacing batteries or these little organelles. They're moving nuclei. Well, the 2 scientists are 2 people who have actually done human cloning and made cloned human embryos. And one of them, in fact, Chelsea said, "Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it, just so I can go ahead and do these experiments."
Wow.
Again, this sort of push. So now the Institute on Medicine, starting really about March of last year, of 2015, started their panel discussions. I think they invited maybe a couple of ethicists, but again, mostly scientists interested in doing these experiments. In the meantime, and again, you're aware, and your listeners probably are, that Great Britain jumped on ahead on this, and a little over a year ago approved these types of experiments. Recently approved, just a few days ago, the idea of the gene editing, of actually cutting and splicing, but again, doing it with human embryos. Creating new human beings as an experiment. So we saw this all moving forward, and we saw and certainly expected the answer we would get from the Institute on Medicine. So we started talking to members of Congress about, you just need to be aware of this particular problem coming up about genetic manipulation of young human beings. And there were several members of Congress that they got it, and they saw that this was moving ahead way too quickly without adequate discussion. In particular, Congressman Adderholt decided, since he was chair of one of the subcommittees in the Appropriations Committee in the House, is that he was well positioned to put some legislative language in that would at least push the pause button and tell them that they couldn't move ahead with these experiments. There's already a bit of legislation, and you know it, and Rebecca knows it, called the Dickey-Wicker Amendment, that says you can't use federal taxpayer funds to create embryos for these kinds of experiments. But what about those who don't use taxpayer funds? They still have to get FDA approval to move ahead with these experiments, because they fully intend to create these new embryos genetically and put them into a womb and gestate them to birth. The FDA has to approve that kind of experimentation. And so we educated a number of members of Congress and helped them craft some language, which, as you say, got into this big omnibus funding bill. Congress gets a little lazy at the end of their work year and just sort of rolls everything into one big bill and passes it to fund things. But it's an opportunity to add a little bit of language, and that's what Congressman Adderholt did, was get that language in there that says FDA cannot even review these proposals, let alone approve them. So we've got a pause button now for at least a year. We're hoping we can extend that pause and maybe even increase the prevention of these kind of experiments until there's an adequate time to really discuss the ethics as well as the science.
So you put this pause on there, and meanwhile, you said that just recently the National Institutes of Health, they gave the FDA the go-ahead for some of
the
this?
Institute on Medicine was the one that they were doing in fact, just today, just a couple of hours ago, before we started this interview, the Institute on Medicine released their report.
This was their kind of their report on all of the meetings that they've had basically up till now. Because I know I listened to a few of them online, some of the ones you were talking about. So this is kind of their summarization of what took place, and then their recommendation.
Yeah. They had several public meetings. They invited a lot of people. They did take a little bit of public comment. I got a whole 2 minutes to talk to them, and a number of other people got a couple of minutes. And then they also did kind of their own closed-door studies and discussions. But, again, it's kind of what you would expect. I haven't read through the whole report. It's over 100 pages long.
Right.
But I read the summary and skimmed through, and the bottom line is they would consider it ethically acceptable to proceed with these human experiments creating 3-parent embryos. So this report now goes to the FDA, and without this little bit of legislation to push the pause button, the FDA, we're told, already has 1 or 2 proposals waiting on their desk. Well, this legislation will prevent them from moving ahead, or else that would probably happen and happen very quickly.
Well, that's good, especially the way things are going now. So far the discussion with the Institute of Medicine and the FDA has been the whole 3-parent thing. Have they discussed the CRISPR and the gene editing specifically, or has it only been on the 3-parent IVF so far?
They've just started those discussions, and again, it's the same group.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's probably you're probably going to get the same results. I just don't know if they've.
We can always be hopeful that maybe a little common sense.
You're right. Well, there are some people in the scientific community that are even not necessarily pro-life, not conservative by any stretch of the imagination, especially with the gene editing, who are saying, we really don't know what effect this is going to have, and we probably shouldn't go forward with it. There are voices of opposition or of reason, and so that is something to be hopeful for, that they might, talk some sense into some of this, the people that just want to blindly move ahead, and
So they have formed that committee, though, and they had a meeting, interestingly enough, in December of 2015, where they invited actually some scientists from China as well as from Great Britain. China was the one at that point who had done the one experiment in this sort of CRISPR nuclear DNA gene manipulation. Now, again, that particular meeting, they didn't really invite very many people to give an ethical perspective.
Right.
This was looking at the science, and a friend of mine, Wesley Smith, phrases it as they were simply looking at a way that they could make it look good, so they could move forward. Oh, let's regulate it, we're not interested in prohibiting it. We want to regulate it. There are, as you say, good voices of reason out there, though, even in the scientific and the academic community. In fact, that phrase, push the pause button, is from a couple of Nobel laureates who are in no stretch of the imagination pro-life, but do have serious ethical concerns about moving too fast. So this will now come under study by the Institute on Medicine. One hopes that they will be looking more seriously at the ethical concerns. But, as we've noted, Great Britain has already decided to move ahead with this. I read over the information on that just a day or so ago. It's interesting that they haven't yet bothered to look at the ethics either.
But even the science of it, I think that's the that's also where, the questions we don't know,
Right.
of just the safety issue of
Yeah.
what this is going to mean for those who are genetically modified in the future. I mean, there's ethical points of view there, but that's also just a scientific sort of health concern that, should be taken into consideration.
It is. There's another thing here that they're not really discussing, and they didn't really address with the previous discussion on three-parent embryos is, are there any alternatives?
Right.
Because what they're doing is focusing on actually the beginning of life, manipulating human embryos, creating them in a certain way, a designed way. Designer babies is the common term you might hear, but genetically modified human beings. But are there other ways to go about this? And the short answer is yes. In both of these kinds of manipulations, there are ways to use these technologies or other related therapeutic technologies that don't cross an ethical line and that actually treat people that have the disease.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what Rebecca and I were talking about. We're talking about this science using it in one way. Like there are ethical ways to use this science on existing patients that you can get permission from, to actually help people that are living today with these diseases. And that's, if we could refocus the discussion towards there, and say, look, let's find a place where we can, come together and say that's not controversial at all. And use this science in a good way that's going to actually really help people. That is a discussion definitely worth having. I mean, we need to have this discussion because obviously once the science exists, people are going to want to use it in this way. So we have to discuss the ethics of that and, keep that into consideration. But then just shift the focus and be like, okay, but let's just look at these other ways we can do this and work with this and work together to try to help people, actually help. If our concern is actually helping people, then let's talk about actually doing that.
And one would hope that is the real concern. I think for some of these people, that is their authentic concern, but they only see attacking this in one way. That's a way that does cause a lot of ethical concern, not just among pro-lifers, as we've said, but even among, the general scientific community. There are a lot of analogies, but there might be an appropriate use, time and place for a bazooka, but killing flies on the back porch is not, because there are a lot of other problems you're going to create. So, in fact, with the new CRISPR technology. Here's a recent example. Just a few months ago, the announcement that a little girl in the UK had been treated for leukemia using this technology. Now, so here's the difference, though. They weren't talking about creating her fresh, genetically engineered so she wouldn't have this leukemia. They talked about instead taking immune cells, using that CRISPR-Cas gene editing technology to edit the immune cells, the white cells, so that, number one, they wouldn't die due to a certain type of chemotherapy, and it would sort of up their response to try to attack the cancerous cells and any other infections. They gave these cells then to this little girl already born, in fact, about a year old at that time. So now you're not altering her for the future.
Right.
You simply gave her a fresh immune system and were able now to use a targeted chemotherapy to get at her leukemia. In point of fact, once they'd then taken care of that leukemia, they used an adult stem cell transplant to build her immune system.
Wow.
She doesn't have leukemia anymore. Happy, healthy little girl.
Wow.
There's an appropriate and ethical use of technology.
Wow. So I guess looking forward, you said there's a pause button now for about a year.
Right.
And what kind of sense did you get, I guess, from the legislators on it doesn't really seem like any of this is much of a priority for Congress at this point. But I mean, you know, a pause button is only going to do so much, and regulation's only going to do so much. I mean, what ideally we would need is a ban on this kind of research. Other countries have them. It wouldn't be out of the ordinary, you know. It wouldn't be something, you know, backwards or anything for the United States to do. But what kind of sense did you get from some of the legislators there of, would that ever even be a possibility here? Or are they just kind of, we'll work with you on, you know, trying to, you know, hold it off for a while and see how it goes, or, you know.
Right. I actually have a pretty good sense and a good feeling from them. I mean, I have kind of the same jaded view of Congress in general, but let's not overlook the fact that there are a lot of good pro-life.
I have to keep reminding myself of that.
Yeah. And, you know, whether it's the folks we worked with this past year on this little piece of legislation, or others in Congress, especially in the House of Representatives, but also in the Senate, there are people still committed to, number one, maintaining that sort of pause until we get realistic discussion about the ethics, as well as trying to move something else. Now, this year, are you going to get more than that? It's unlikely. What we really need now is a pro-life president who will sign some really good bills into law. We see that there's a way forward. We know it can be done because in the reconciliation bill, for example, they were able to move forward some good possibilities and put it on the president's desk for the first time ever, basically. But of course, with the current president, that was vetoed. Something like a prohibition, a total prohibition against genetically engineering human beings is unlikely this year. But if we had a pro-life president next year, you know, there's some good chances we can move some very important and very meaningful legislation. So I think the focus this year will be on trying to continue to play defense, if you will, maintain that mark, but also to move some more pro-life legislators and a pro-life president into that white building down the street.
That's the important. I mean, it's not just abortion that we need a pro-life president for. I mean, I hear a lot of pro-lifer, you know, even pro-lifers say, you know, well, the president can't do anything about abortion, but that's not the only issue we've got going on here right now. And we need somebody, we need a friendly pen in the White House to be able to sign some of these bills, if we can get them forward, to sign some of this stuff that on these other issues that we desperately need to do something on. Well, I think that positive note is a good note to end on. I think it's nice to have something positive to end on, looking forward. I know, and I'm glad to hear it from you, like being, you know, involved with, because I don't know what's going on, you know, up there. We don't really, this is a lot of stuff we don't hear a lot of discussion on, so it's hard to tell, hard to know, you know, what the sense is up there, and if there is any hope. So I'm glad to hear that, you know, there's some good people up there, and hopefully if we get the even more good people in, that we can kind of finally start doing something about this, because we don't want to be playing catch up on this. Like we don't
want to just always play defense. We want to go on offense. We want to protect and save more lives. But I think there is a great promise coming. So we just need to persevere.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on and sharing this positive information with us.
Thank you.